Welcome to another deep dive. And if you are joining us today, you probably already know the fundamental premise of our work here.
Right.
We view ourselves and we view you, the listener, as behavioral architects. That means we don't deal in vague, feel-good platitudes.
We have zero tolerance for motivational fluff.
Exactly. No mystical wishful thinking. So if you've ever felt totally frustrated, sitting cross-legged, trying to just clear your mind while your brain relentlessly reminds you of some embarrassing thing you said 5 years ago, you are in the right place.
We treat the human mind as a highly complex, programmable operating system.
And today, you're sitting down with us to run some serious diagnostics and optimize your internal framework.
That is precisely the mission.
Yeah.
We want to bypass all the superficial, commercialized self-help rhetoric that just clutters this space and goes straight to the structural source code.
Yeah.
So today's deep dive is an intensive, completely mechanical exploration of a highly advanced psychological field manual. We are unpacking a fascinating text called In Search of Zero, 112 Paths to Meditative Enlightenment.
Such a good title.
It is. It's authored by Kanv Sachdev, who is a subconscious architect and the founder of an expansive framework known as the White Light System.
I'm so glad we are finally digging into this one, because what Kanv has achieved here is, frankly, it's a work of structural genius.
Oh, absolutely.
He has taken an ancient text, the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, which is well over 1,000 years old, and he has methodically stripped away all the religious, cultural, and esoteric dogma that typically surrounds it.
Right. He doesn't frame it as some mystical scripture you just have to blindly believe in.
Exactly. He frames it as the original, uncorrupted source code of human consciousness. He reveals it to be this highly precise, 112-step architectural blueprint for fundamentally hacking the human nervous system.
It really is a masterclass in reverse engineering.
Kind of.
Kanv takes these millennium-old philosophical concepts and translates them into a modern clinical manual for psychological engineering. And the goal of our session today is to give you a mechanical understanding of these concepts. We want you to walk away with a clear, actionable protocol you can immediately apply. But I do have to be completely upfront here.
Please do.
What we are covering today merely scratches the surface of Kanv's complete architectural system. His work within the White Light System is incredibly vast. It covers everything from deep subconscious reprogramming to active manifestation.
So today, we are just analyzing the foundation of that larger structure.
Right, the foundational blueprints.
So what does this actually mean for you listening right now? It means we're going to break down the mechanics of the mind piece by piece. Let's start with the core concept that anchors Kanv's entire manual, the architecture of the zero state of consciousness.
Yes.
Now, I'll be honest, when most people, and myself included, initially hear the word zero in a meditative context, they imagine a void.
They picture this sterile, empty state of nothingness.
Like locking your brain in a sensory deprivation tank. But Kanv defines zero entirely differently. It is absolutely not a void. He describes it as a pristine operating system.
And that distinction is vital. If we look at this clinically, your default human state, the way you're perceiving the world right this second, is a highly filtered, heavily constructed experience.
Right.
It is not objective reality. It is a biological rendering entirely driven by evolutionary survival mechanisms. Your brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly editing, interpreting, and constructing reality based on a massive database of past conditioning, unresolved trauma, emotional baggage, learned behavioral patterns.
While running constantly.
Yes. So achieving zero consciousness is essentially initiating a system reboot. It is a state of pure potential and unmediated perception where you temporarily suspend all of those historical background narratives.
I used to lean heavily on the computer RAM analogy for this. Thinking about everyday consciousness as a laptop bogged down by 100 different background applications running simultaneously.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it.
You've got an app open for that stressful email you need to send. An app open for a childhood insecurity that just got triggered. An app open for figuring out what to cook for dinner.
And an app open processing the low-grade ache in your lower back.
Exactly. And all of these invisible processes are eating up your active processing power. So reaching zero, in that sense, is force quitting those background apps, so you have 100% of your processing power available for the present moment.
That analogy holds up really well.
Yeah.
But we can also think of it like tuning an orchestra.
Okay, I like.
In your default state, every musician in the orchestra, your memories, your anxieties, your sensory inputs, is playing a different song at maximum volume. It's just a cacophony.
Pure chaos.
Right. Zero isn't kicking the musicians off the stage to create a dead silence. It is the moment the conductor raises the baton and all the chaotic tuning stops. There is a profound, pregnant stillness. The potential for any music to be played exists, but right now there's just pure unified readiness.
Unified readiness, I love that.
And when you free up that psychological processing power, you encounter the 4 core characteristics of this pristine operating system that Kanv outlines.
Let's walk through those 4 characteristics, because this is where it stops being abstract and starts becoming highly observable. The first one he mentions is unbounded awareness. What does that actually look like mechanically?
Unbounded awareness is the realization experienced physically and cognitively that consciousness isn't compartmentalized to the space just behind your eyes.
Right.
Normally, our awareness is hyper-focused, like a narrow flashlight beam scanning for threats or resources. Unbounded awareness is turning off the flashlight and turning on a floodlight. You are taking in the totality of your environment and your internal state simultaneously without fixating on any single point.
Which leads right into the second characteristic, non-reactive presence.
Yes.
This one is huge for anyone dealing with stress. It's the ability to act as a pure witness. You are receiving incoming data, maybe a loud noise or an annoying comment from a coworker, but you lack the biological compulsion to immediately engage with it.
You don't try to modify it or resist it.
Exactly. You're just letting the data pass through the system.
Precisely. And that naturally births the third characteristic, which is spontaneous intelligence. This is a fascinating neurological phenomena. When the noise of constant neurotic mental commentary is silenced, a heightened clarity emerges naturally. You don't have to think hard to solve a problem.
Right. I'm sure everyone listening has experienced a micro version of this. You're trying desperately to remember the name of an actor or a solution to a work problem, and you're straining your brain, nothing happens.
You're forcing it.
Yeah. Then you give up, you go take a shower, your brain relaxes its frantic searching, and boom, the answer just pops into your head instantly. That's spontaneous intelligence. The system works best when you stop forcing it.
Exactly. And the final characteristic of zero is fundamental equanimity. This is a state of profound structural neutrality. It means experiences move through your nervous system without leaving a psychological residue.
Meaning you don't hold on to them?
Right. You can experience a moment of intense joy or a moment of sharp pain, but once the moment passes, the system immediately returns to baseline. It doesn't cling to the joy, and it doesn't build a complex trauma narrative around the pain.
Okay, I love the theory here, but let's be real, and this is where I want to push back a little. You cannot just flip a mental switch and access this pristine, beautifully equanimous operating system while you are sitting in the middle of a chaotic living room.
Definitely not.
You know, slouching on a soft couch while your phone buzzes every 2 minutes. You can't execute high-level software on compromised hardware. You have to build a laboratory first. And that brings us to Chapter 2 of Kanv's manual. Environmental control and biomechanical alignment.
This is where Kanv's engineering mindset becomes incredibly apparent. If you are going to conduct high-level, delicate psychological experimentation, you need a precise, controlled baseline environment.
Otherwise, you don't know what's causing the interference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You don't know if your mind is wandering because of an unresolved psychological issue or simply because your physical environment is sending erratic signals to your nervous system. Kanv outlines exact environmental parameters for creating what is traditionally called a sacred space. But from our clinical perspective, this is strictly about sensory management.
I have to share a personal anecdote here because Kanv insists on a temperature control of 68 to 72 degrees Fahrenheit. And for years, I thought I was tough.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I thought I could meditate anywhere. I tried to do a deep session in my apartment during a heat wave. It was easily 85 degrees in the room. I spent the entire 30 minutes just being absolutely furious at my own sweat.
Because your hardware was failing.
My brain wasn't processing higher states of awareness. It was screaming, we are overheating, deploy cooling mechanisms, find water, find shade. He is absolutely right about the environment acting as a sensory baseline.
It is basic human biology. If the temperature is 80 degrees, your body is deploying vital biological resources to cool you down. If there is a flashing light from a passing car outside your window, your visual cortex is firing low-level alarm signals.
Right.
Kanv also mandates noise management, specifically using white noise or consistent ambient sounds to mask jarring acoustic spikes, and he requires diffused soft lighting. These aren't interior design suggestions to set a relaxing spa-like mood.
It's not about aesthetics.
No. They are highly precise environmental interventions. The goal is to minimize erratic sensory input to the autonomic nervous system. You want your external environment to be so perfectly neutral that your brain essentially stops paying attention to it.
Which isolates the variable. You mute the outside world, so the only data left to observe is the inside world. But the environment is only half the battle. The other half is the actual physical hardware you are using to observe, your body. Let's talk about biomechanical alignment. Kanv translates ancient seated postures, things like Padmasana, Siddhasana, Sukhasana, and Vajrasana. In a lot of yoga classes, these are presented almost like magical shapes you put your body into, but Kanv views them strictly through the lens of structural engineering.
If we look at modern ergonomic science, it validates these ancient postures completely. Throughout the text, the human spine is described as a delicate antenna and the central highway of the nervous system.
I like that, central highway.
Proper postural alignment isn't about looking like a serene statue. It is about ensuring optimal neurological and energetic flow. When your spine is properly stacked, meaning you are maintaining the natural lumbar curve of the lower back, your chest is open, and your head is balanced directly above your shoulders, you eliminate the need for muscular compensation.
Let's deep dive into just one of these to really mechanically understand it, because throwing out 4 Sanskrit names isn't helpful. Let's look at Vajrasana, the kneeling posture, sometimes called thunderbolt pose. You are sitting on your heels with your shins flat on the floor. Why does this work structurally?
Well, because when you sit on your heels, your pelvis naturally locks into a slight anterior tilt. That tilt automatically stacks your lumbar spine into its natural curve without you having to use your core muscles to hold it there.
Exactly. Contrast that with slouching on a soft sofa. When you slouch, your pelvis tilts posteriorly, your lower back rounds out. Instantly, your hip flexors shorten and tighten. To keep your eyes looking forward, your neck has to crane forward.
And your head weighs about 10 to 12 pounds.
Right. When it's tilted forward, your neck and upper back muscles are suddenly working overtime under massive tension just to hold that weight up.
And what happens neurologically? Those straining neck muscles start sending low-grade pain and distress signals to your brain. Your brain opens up another background app labeled physical discomfort in neck.
Yes.
You are trying to achieve the pristine zero state, but your hardware is constantly interrupting you, saying, hey, we are structurally collapsing over here.
So by mastering biomechanical alignment through a posture like Vajrasana, you create a sustainable physical platform. You take the structural stress down to 0, so your body stops sending distress signals to your brain.
And once the laboratory is perfectly calibrated and the physical hardware is biomechanically optimized, the architect can finally interface with the system. And the primary control interface of the human operating system is the breath.
This takes us into Section 3 of Kanv's manual, Respiratory Interventions. The emphasis he places on breathing is staggering in its precision. Out of the 112 techniques in the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, approximately 24 of them focus entirely on manipulating the breath.
And there is a very sound clinical reason for that. Think about the human body. Almost all of our vital functions are locked behind an autonomic firewall.
Yeah, you cannot consciously command your heart to beat slower.
You cannot tell your digestive system to speed up or your liver to filter blood differently.
Yeah.
But the breath is the one physiological function that exists on both sides of the firewall.
It's incredible.
It happens automatically when you aren't thinking about it. But the second you decide to, you can take manual conscious control of it. It is the only direct bridge between the conscious mind and the autonomic nervous system.
It is a direct mechanical lever. Specifically, conscious breathing is used to shift the body's entire physiological state. Most people operate entirely in sympathetic dominance. That is your fight-or-flight stress response.
Right. When you are stressed, your breathing becomes shallow, rapid, and localized in the upper chest.
Kanv's respiratory techniques are designed to manually pull the lever in the opposite direction, forcing the nervous system into parasympathetic dominance, the rest and digest state. I always compare the breath to the throttle or the transmission of a vehicle.
That's a good analogy.
Most of us just leave our breathing on an automatic transmission.
Yep.
When road conditions get rough, meaning when you get a tense email from your boss or you get into an argument with your partner, your engine revs up erratically. You start taking those shallow, panicky chest breaths. Your heart rate spikes. Conscious breathing is grabbing the stick shift and taking manual control of the RPMs to stabilize the vehicle, regardless of how bumpy the road is outside. Let's walk through one of the specific gears Kanv uses. Equal ratio breathing, or what he sometimes outlines as a 4-count inhale to a 6-count exhale. What is the specific biological mechanism there?
The mechanism is tied directly to the vagus nerve and your heart rate variability. When you inhale, your heart rate naturally speeds up slightly to circulate oxygen. When you exhale, your heart rate slows down.
Okay.
So by deliberately extending the exhalation so that it is longer than the inhalation, like inhaling for 4 seconds and exhaling for 6 seconds, you are mechanically forcing the heart rate to slow down over a longer duration.
Right.
This sends a massive, undeniable signal up the vagus nerve to the brain saying, we are safe, there is no predator. You can power down the stress response. It is a biological override.
That is incredible. But Kanv goes even deeper than just ratio breathing. Let's dive into the very first specific protocol in the manual, Technique 1, which focuses on observing the gap between breaths. I find this to be a brilliant psychological intervention. Most people view breathing as a continuous, unbroken loop. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale.
Yes.
But Kanv instructs the practitioner to focus all of their microscopic attention on the infinitesimal pause between the inhalation and the exhalation.
That pause is profoundly significant. We can frame that microsecond as a quantum space or a hard system reset. Think about the biomechanics. Your lungs have fully expanded. The stretch receptors in your alveoli have fired. And then for a fraction of a second, the muscular contraction stops before the release begins.
Right.
In that microscopic gap, physical momentum entirely ceases. The body isn't doing anything because the mind is so deeply tethered to the constant momentum of the body. When the body briefly pauses, the mind suddenly loses its anchor. It allows consciousness to briefly detach from the relentless forward motion of time and biology.
It's like that split second of total weightlessness you feel at the very top of a roller coaster right before it drops. For a microsecond, gravity seems to turn off. By focusing your awareness entirely on that gap, you start expanding that feeling of weightlessness in your mind.
Exactly.
Kanv also talks about Sushumna Nadi breath activation, which sounds very esoteric, but again, he strips the mysticism away.
Yes, in traditional texts, the Sushumna Nadi is often described in very mystical terms as an invisible energy tube. Kanv treats it strictly as the primary neural pathway running along the spinal cord, the central highway we discussed earlier.
So it's physiological.
Entirely. When he instructs you to direct your breath awareness up and down this central channel, you aren't moving actual air up your spine. You are moving your focused neuroelectrical attention. You are systematically stimulating the central nervous system from the base of the spine all the way to the brainstem.
Wow.
This creates deep neurological coherence. It's like running a diagnostic scan up and down the main trunk line of a server.
So we've set up the laboratory, we've optimized the hardware with biomechanical alignment, we've taken control of the throttle using the breath, the system is stabilized. Now the architect can begin to hack the incoming data streams. And that brings us to Section 4, sensory overrides and perceptual hacking.
This section contains roughly 20 distinct techniques dedicated entirely to sensory awareness. The objective here is quite radical. Kanv wants you to intercept raw sensory data before your brain's cognitive software has the chance to attach labels, judgments, or historical context to it.
Before the story starts.
Exactly. You have to understand that human brains are compulsive meaning-making machines. The literal millisecond a photon of light hits your retina or a sound wave hits your eardrum, your cognitive software rushes in to categorize it, judge it, and file it away.
To use a web development analogy, practicing these sensory techniques is like viewing the raw HTML source code of a website, instead of looking at the rendered graphic user interface with all the pretty pictures and formatted text.
That's perfect.
You are trying to experience the data in its absolute purest, most fundamental state. Let's look at visual hacking, specifically Technique 31, which is traditionally known as Trataka. This involves maintaining a fierce, unwavering gaze on a single external point, like a candle flame or a dot on the wall. Why does this work?
It works because it exploits a flaw in how our visual processing system operates. Normally, your eyes are constantly making tiny, rapid movements called saccades. They are darting around, gathering micro details of your environment.
Right.
This constant eye movement is deeply linked to memory retrieval and active cognitive processing. It's actually the mechanism behind therapies like EMDR. By locking your gaze onto a single unwavering point, you paralyze those saccades. Clinically, you induce a mild retinal fatigue. When the eyes artificially start gathering new data, the visual cortex stops frantically processing. The processing loop is broken, and as a result, the mind is forced into a state of profound, uncomfortable stillness.
It's basically a denial of service attack on your own visual cortex. You just flood it with the exact same pixel of information until the software freezes.
Yes. Kanv also details inner light visualization, which is essentially generating an internal focal point. You close your eyes, and you generate a bright point of light in your mind's eye. You are giving the visual cortex an arbitrary command to hold on to so it doesn't go searching for old memories to look at. But I find the auditory interventions even more fascinating.
The auditory techniques are profoundly challenging. Techniques 22 and 27 instruct the practitioner to focus on the absolute silence between sounds, or to track ambient sounds without mentally identifying the source. Let's use a real-world example. Imagine you are meditating and you hear a siren outside.
Okay.
Your default software immediately triggers ambulance. Someone is hurt. Danger. It's too loud. This is ruining my meditation. A whole cascade of narrative and judgment.
Exactly. The hack here is to listen to the siren purely as raw acoustic data. It is nothing but a specific frequency and amplitude of sound waves vibrating the tiny bones in your inner ear. It isn't good, it isn't bad, it isn't an ambulance, it's just a vibration.
You are trying to listen to the sound without interpreting its semantic meaning. You hear it the way a microphone hears it, just capturing data, without an opinion.
And Kanv extends this deconstructive approach to the tactile senses as well. There is a technique that involves simply rubbing your hands together to generate physical warmth. But the practice isn't just about getting warm. It is about hyper-focusing your attention on the microscopic friction between the ridges of your fingerprints.
Oh, wow.
It is about feeling the precise activation of the nerve endings in the skin. You are deliberately overwhelming your brain's sensory processing centers with such an intense volume of pure present-moment physical data that the narrative mind, the part of you worrying about tomorrow's schedule, simply lacks the bandwidth to compete. It gets crowded out.
Okay, so we've learned how to hack the external data streams. We can intercept the sights, the sounds, and the physical sensations before they become stories. But that is the easy part. The true test of a behavioral architect is tackling the most turbulent, unpredictable, and powerful internal data stream of all, human emotion. Let's move into Section 5, the alchemy of affect.
This is where Kanv's framework becomes life-changing. There are about 15 techniques in the manual focused exclusively on emotional transmutation, and Kanv establishes a very strict, foundational, and frankly uncomfortable rule here. Emotions are not identity.
Say more on that.
You are not your anger. You are not your sadness.
Yeah.
Emotions are pure, raw, kinetic energy. They are vibrant, intelligent, and fundamentally neutral biological and chemical events occurring in the body. The suffering you experience doesn't come from the emotion itself. It comes entirely from the narrative you attach to that energy.
I want to stop and highlight this because it sounds great in theory, but it is incredibly difficult in practice. Let's play devil's advocate here. When someone cuts you off in traffic, your brain doesn't immediately say, look at this pure, neutral, kinetic energy washing over my nervous system.
Definitely not.
Your brain says, I want to yell at this idiot. They almost killed me. People are so disrespectful. The story and the feeling are instantly welded together. How do you actually insert a pause in real time? Let's unpack the mechanics of Technique 20, emotional alchemy, because the protocol here is clinical perfection.
It is a rigorous 4-step clinical process. Step 1, identify the emotion. Acknowledge that anger has entered the system. Step 2, and this is the hardest part, you must separate the emotion from the narrative. Drop the story about the bad driver. Drop the story about how disrespectful they were.
Just drop the story entirely.
Yes. Step 3, locate the physical sensation of that emotion in the body. Where is it? Is it a sudden heat radiating in your chest? Is it an involuntary clenching in your jaw? Is your stomach tied in a knot?
So you treat it like a localized physiological symptom.
Exactly. And then step 4, you observe that physical sensation strictly as a localized energetic frequency until it naturally dissipates. You do not feed it new thoughts, and you do not try to push it away. You just watch the heat in your chest.
This brings up a critical point about the biological half-life of an emotion. Neurologically speaking, an emotion, the actual chemical dump of adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream only lasts about 90 seconds.
Right.
The initial wave is over in a minute and a half. The only reason you stay angry for an hour or hold a grudge for a decade is because you keep looping the narrative in your head, which triggers the brain to dump more chemicals. You keep reinfecting yourself with the story.
Which raises an important question about how our society typically trains us to handle emotions. We usually default to one of two highly destructive strategies. We suppress them or we dramatize them. From an architectural standpoint, doing either of those things guarantees a system failure.
How so?
Attempting to forcefully suppress an emotion, to shove it down and pretend it isn't there, is exactly like putting a heavy lid on the pot of boiling water. It doesn't stop the water from boiling. It just increases the internal pressure until the vessel violently explodes.
And dramatizing it, screaming, throwing things, venting constantly is just taking the boiling water and splashing it all over everyone around you. You're still trapped in the heat.
Precisely. Witnessing the emotion, as outlined in Kanv's four-step protocol, acts as a precision pressure release valve. By dropping the story and just feeling the heat in your chest, you allow the kinetic energy to metabolize and burn off through your nervous system without acting out the destructive narrative. You let the water boil off as harmless steam.
So this naturally leads to a massive philosophical and structural collision. If my thoughts are just background apps, I can force quit, and my sensory inputs are just raw data I can hack, and my deeply felt emotions are just temporary waves of kinetic energy.
Yeah.
What exactly is the entity that is experiencing all of this? If I am not my thoughts, and I am not my feelings, who is driving the car? That question plunges us directly into the ultimate psychological deconstruction outlined in the manual, dismantling the ego.
This is section 6, and it is the crux of the transformation. Kanv views the ego not as your true, fundamental self, but as the final, most convincing illusion of the operating system. Clinically analyzing this psychological construct, Kanv defines the ego as a multi-layered mechanism of self-preservation. It is a dense cluster of conditioning, memories, trauma responses, and survival strategies that creates an illusion of separation.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is the program your brain constantly runs to keep you safe, distinct, and protected from your environment. But here's the paradox. The very program that kept you safe is now the highly restrictive barrier preventing you from accessing higher cognitive function.
Let's look at the mechanics of Technique 21, thought pattern deconstruction, and Technique 23, ego dissolution through witnessing. The process Kanv outlines requires ruthless mapping and dismantling. First, you deconstruct the narrative. You start tracking the origin of your personal stories and defense mechanisms.
Yes.
When you get defensive in a meeting at work, you have to trace that feeling back. You realize your reaction isn't actually about the project. It's a pre-programmed response from a time you felt inadequate 10 years ago. You realize your ego is just playing a greatest hits compilation of your past fears.
Once you map those origins, you practice energetic disidentification. This is an active structural process where you deliberately create a spatial separation in your mind between your pure awareness and your continuous stream of thoughts. The manual uses a brilliant, very accessible analogy here to explain this: the sky and the clouds.
I love this analogy. It makes something incredibly abstract very concrete.
In this analogy, the ego, your thoughts, your anxieties, your identity, is the pattern of the clouds. The clouds are constantly shifting, changing shape, gathering into dark storms, or drifting lazily. And because the clouds are so dense and so active, they convince themselves they are the entire atmosphere.
Sure.
Witness consciousness, the goal of these techniques, is the sudden, profound realization that you are not the clouds.
You are the sky.
You are the vast, unchanging, expansive blue sky that merely holds the clouds. The clouds move through you, they obscure you temporarily, but they do not define you and they cannot damage the sky.
And I really want to highlight the clinical brilliance of how Kanv frames this. In so many New Age or traditional self-help circles, the ego is treated as a demon. It is framed as an enemy to be destroyed. It's a war against the self. Kanv completely rejects that. The ego isn't evil. It is just a temporary, outdated survival program. It served a vital purpose when we were hunter-gatherers needing to avoid predators and navigate brutal tribal hierarchies. It kept us alive. But now, in the modern world, it is obsolete code. It simply needs to be uninstalled so you can access the higher, more advanced functions of the human operating system.
And that transition is critical, because once that restrictive ego software is uninstalled or at least put into sleep mode, the practitioner can finally access the advanced hardware capabilities of the human body. This takes us into Section 7, Advanced Internal Architecture. We're moving into the deep end here, focusing on the subtle body and Kundalini.
Yes.
We're looking specifically at techniques 46 through 48. Now, it is absolutely crucial that we maintain our clinical anti-fluff tone here. These specific concepts have been heavily mysticized and often badly misunderstood in popular culture.
Absolutely. If you go on social media, you see people talking about their chakras and Kundalini energy like it's a magical superpower from a comic book. Kanv strips all of that away. He describes these concepts not as magic, but as highly sophisticated, ancient maps of human consciousness and dormant neurological potential. Let's break down the concept of the koshas, or the sheaths.
The koshas are presented as 5 nested layers of psychological and physiological processing. Think of them like Russian nesting dolls of human awareness, moving from the most dense to the most subtle. You start with the physical sheath, that is the gross hardware of the body, flesh and bone.
Right.
Then you move inward through the energy sheath, which governs the autonomic functions and breath. Then the mental sheath, where everyday thoughts and sensory inputs are processed. Deeper still is the wisdom sheath, the domain of spontaneous intelligence and deep intuition we discussed earlier. Finally, you reach the bliss sheath, which Kanv maps as the most subtle, quantum-level operating system of pure, unmediated awareness. It's a literal, step-by-step map of moving from dense, material processing to pure consciousness.
Let's spend a minute on that wisdom sheath, because I think people confuse it with just being smart. The wisdom sheath isn't about intellect or how many books you've read. It's the layer of processing that recognizes patterns without having to think about them. It's the gut feeling that tells you not to trust a certain business deal, even if the spreadsheet looks perfect. When you quiet the noisy mental sheath, you finally give the wisdom sheath the bandwidth to transmit its data.
That is a perfect description. And if we connect this layered model to the concept of kundalini, we again have to strip away the esoteric metaphors of coiled serpents and magic. Kundalini is described in the text as a profoundly powerful, dormant, evolutionary energy residing at the base of the spine, specifically at the root chakra. Biologically and psychologically, this is the seat of your most primal survival instincts.
Right. Let's look at the chakras strictly as developmental stages and neurological hubs. The root chakra isn't a magical glowing red orb at the base of your spine. It correlates to the oldest part of the nervous system, dealing with basic elimination, fight or flight, and physical security. It's the psychological threshold of survival. If you are worried about paying rent, your energy is locked in the root.
Exactly. Moving up, the solar plexus isn't just an energy center. It maps to the enteric nervous system in the gut, representing the psychological threshold of self-confidence, digestion of experience, and personal power. The throat chakra corresponds to the vocal cords and the thyroid, representing a much more recent evolutionary development linked to authentic social communication and expression.
So it's an evolutionary map.
Yes. When Kanv talks about Kundalini energy rising, he is talking about systematically upgrading the firmware at each major intersection of the central nervous system. When activated through precise breath control and extreme, sustained mental focus, this dormant energy travels up the central nervous system, the Sushumna Nadi, to fundamentally recalibrate the brain's perceptual system.
However, we must hit the brakes here and strongly emphasize Kanv's clinical warnings. These are high-voltage neurological interventions. Activating these dormant potentials without the proper structural scaffolding is not just foolish, it is dangerous. The text explicitly highlights the absolute need for physical grounding, warning of the severe risk.
That is the ultimate test.
You can't just be enlightened while sitting on a perfectly engineered cushion in a temperature-controlled room. You have to be enlightened while you are stuck in rush hour traffic. You have to maintain zero consciousness while you are sitting in a hostile board meeting. That brings us to the final chapter, Section 8, the protocols of integration. How do we execute this blueprint in the real world?
Integration is the translation of these 112 pathways from the sterile, controlled laboratory into messy, real-world behavioral architecture. Kanv offers a profound insight here that reframes the entire practice. He writes, "Time is not your enemy, it's your creative collaborator." Many people abandon these practices because they believe they need 2 hours of pristine isolation every day to make progress. But the system is designed with a highly practical, tiered architecture for building a sustainable routine.
Let's look at those tiers because they are so accessible. For a beginner, the manual prescribes just 5 to 10 minutes a day. The goal isn't to reach enlightenment in 10 minutes. The goal is simply to establish the behavioral habit and reduce the ego's resistance to sitting still.
Right.
An intermediate practitioner scales up to 15 to 30 minutes, giving them enough time to explore deeper sensory hacking techniques. An advanced practitioner is dedicating 30 to 60 minutes for profound inner recalibration. The Kanv makes it clear that the real magic, the actual rewiring of the brain, happens outside those dedicated blocks, through what he calls micro-moments of awareness.
These micro-moments are the secret weapon of the behavioral architect. They are strategic, 10-second system resets injected directly into the chaos of your daily life. Let's say you're waiting in line at a coffee shop. The default behavior is to immediately pull out your phone, which gives you a dopamine hit but adds more processing load to your mental RAM.
Yes.
The micro-moment protocol is to leave the phone in your pocket. Instead, take 10 seconds to feel the physical weight of your feet on the floor and take 3 conscious equal ratio breaths.
Or it could be feeling the biomechanical alignment of your spine right before you click send on a high-stress email. Are you slouched over the keyboard like a vulture? Sit back, stack the spine, breathe, then send it. It could be practicing tactile deconstruction by focusing intensely on the feeling of the steering wheel under your hands while you are stuck in traffic. You are constantly, relentlessly interrupting the default neurotic software with flashes of pristine operating presence.
He also discusses the concept of working meditation, the practice of single tasking. Multitasking is a myth that fragments mental energy. Working meditation means treating your professional activities as opportunities for mindful engagement rather than mental fragmentation. When you are writing a report, you are only writing the report. You aren't escaping your job to meditate. Your job becomes the meditation.
If we use a behavioral analogy, integration is exactly like developing muscle memory in a martial art. You drill the forms repeatedly in the controlled, safe environment of the dojo, which is your morning meditation space. You practice the blocks and the strikes in a vacuum. You do this so that when you step out into the real world and a threat actually appears, the fluid, non-reactive movement happens automatically.
Exactly.
You don't have to stop and think about how to dodge a punch. Your body just moves. In the exact same way, you drill non-reactive presence on the cushion so that when a massive crisis hits at work, your mind remains spacious and clear automatically.
It becomes your new default operating system.
I have to pause here to just profoundly praise Kanv Sachdev's system. What he has engineered in this manual is a literal masterclass in human optimization. And we have to remind you, the 112 techniques of In Search of Zero are literally just the beginning of his work.
Oh, without a doubt.
The depth of his broader white light system is staggering. In the appendix of this text, he references his extended manuals, things like the 40-day reality shift and his vast manifestation series. He isn't just giving you a tool to calm down, he is providing a comprehensive end-to-end framework for not just observing your reality, but actively authoring it.
It is a remarkable synthesis of ancient mechanics and modern psychology. To summarize the core thesis of today's deep dive, enlightenment or spiritual transcendence or whatever term you want to use for peak human flourishing, it is not a vague mystical accident. It is not reserved for monks hiding in caves.
No.
As Kanv Sachdev has so brilliantly engineered, it is the predictable result of precise, systematic interventions into the human psychological and biomechanical systems. It is an architectural project. You are systematically dismantling outdated fear-based software and upgrading your perceptual hardware.
Which brings us to a final, highly provocative thought for you to mull over as you go about your day. We've spent this entire time talking about hacking your perception, quieting the mind, and returning to the pristine zero state. But let's extrapolate from Kanav's text and peek into what his advanced manifestation work implies. If consciousness is truly a malleable, programmable field, and your current reality is just a rendering of your subconscious memory and past conditioning, what happens when you fully rewrite the source code?
That's the real question.
Once you finally reach zero, are you just passively observing reality? Or are you actively scripting it? Because if you are the architect and the mind is just an operating system, what kind of reality are you going to build once you have admin privileges?
That is the ultimate question this field manual poses. It challenges you to transition from being a passive consumer of your own psychological states to becoming the active, deliberate creator of your entire experience.
So, here is your call to action. We have laid out the mechanics. We've given you the blueprint. Do not let this just be intellectual entertainment that you listen to and then forget. We encourage you to select just one of the techniques we discussed today to test in your own mental laboratory. Maybe you practice tracking the gap between your breaths for 5 minutes. Maybe you try observing the silence between sounds on your commute. Or maybe you just commit to a single 10-second micro reset before you open your inbox. Put the engineering into practice today. Keep optimizing your internal architecture. Until next time.